of the talk is about business and half is about space. But they're really connected because I never would have gotten into space if I hadn't started my business. And I couldn't have started my business without going to FDU. So, you know, it's all connected. Mike sort of went through my resume, but, you know, I have started 2 companies. And last October, I went to space. And now I have an office in Princeton, and I'm trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. But, you know, meanwhile, I'm giving a lot of talks. But after, you know, going to FDU, and I got a PhD and did a postdoc, I worked for RCA Labs for about 11 years and was a standard research scientist. And just suddenly one day I got the idea, hey, I'd like to start a business. And I had no training, no background in business. It just kind of came to my head. So in 1983, you know, with a partner and a little bit of venture capital money, I spun off from RCA Labs and started a fiber optics business. And, you know, had all the usual startup problems, running short of money, struggling to meet payroll, and so on. But after about 5 years, we managed to build up a profitable business. And in 1990, we were acquired by Nippon Sheet Glass. That was back in the days when we all thought Japan was going to take over the world, just as now people are thinking maybe China will take over the world economically. But anyway, after we were acquired by Nippon Sheet Glass, I stayed on for about a year and then drifted off and started another business, which is very typical in an entrepreneurial situation. Might be worth noting, Epitax was, you know, years after I left, was acquired by JDS Uniphase during the fiber optics boom, you know, for $400 million, and they eventually employed over 1,000 people. And I think that, you know, employing that many people is as satisfying as, you know, any of the financial numbers that you might achieve. So after Epitax, I started a company called Sensors Unlimited. And what's unique about that is we did that totally self-financed. We had no investment, and I started that with Marshall Cohen, you know, who knew a lot about sensing. I knew how to make the chips, but didn't know how to make the instruments. So it was kind of a good marriage. And we started off being self-financed. A good thing that we used is a government funding scenario for small businesses called the Small Business Innovation Research Program. And in that, you can get government funding of up to $750,000 for a small business. And there are very few strings attached to it, and it's really a great system of venture capital that you don't have to pay back. So, you know, we use that plus our own money to get sensors going. And by 1998, you know, the telecom boom was starting to pick up. And, you know, it was feeding the internet. And by 1990, in the year 2000, we were doubling our sales every year, and things were just red hot. Those were the days when everyone knew stock was worth more than cash. So we were acquired by Finisar Corporation in the year 2000 for, you know, a phenomenal number of $600 million, which, you know, in retrospect is a huge number, but that's what was happening back in those days. Things are really, you know, too hot to last at that, and shortly, about a year and a half after our acquisition, the whole market crashed. And just as an example, when we were purchased by Finisar, their stock was $35. All right, by the year 2002, it had fallen all the way to 50 cents. So when we bought our company back for $6 million, it's not as an outrageous figure as you might think. We bought the company back. It was a management buyout. We got together and decided this would be a good thing because we knew we had good people and good technology. It's just the market had kind of crashed in telecom and fiber optics. So we bought it back and struggled for about a year and a half. You know, went through over $1 million in losses. But, you know, we reinvented our company from a fiber optics producer into infrared sensing and went back to our roots of making cameras that do things like night vision for the military or sensing ice on aircraft and looking at steel and many industrial sensing applications. And so after about a year and a half, we got to break even and then profitable, just the old-fashioned way with hard work and watching the pennies. And last year, at the end of 2005, we were acquired by Goodrich Corporation for $60 million, which is probably the sensible number for the company. Just to, you know, from starting two companies and having one that I sold, bought back and sold again, you know, I tried to gain some knowledge out of it, and, you know, what are some of the things I can learn from it. And in order to do this, it's kind of instrumental to go back in time and say, what was it like in the year, in March of 2000? You know, what were conditions like? And that's when NASDAQ peaked and high tech was, you know, at a high. And as I mentioned, we all knew stock was worth much more than cash. Going to a technical conference on fiber optics was like going to a rock concert. All right, people were lined up around the door. It was a feeding frenzy. And I watched the value of our company go up a factor 10 in less than a year. And it was just amazing. You know, and that's a good time to sell. It's just, when's a good time to sell your house? When the prices are going up, all right? Now, fast forward 2 years later, October 2002. What was it like? NASDAQ had crashed, bottomed out. You know, stock was worthless, cash is king. You know, conferences were almost empty. Venture capital, down round and no round at all. Most acquisitions, like sensors, had become cash burdens to their parents. And again, we saw valuations drop a factor 10, and that was a good time to buy. And that's one of the main reasons why we bought ourselves back. So, you know, in that interim period from when we bought ourselves back to when we sold ourselves again, we had to undergo this reinvention. And again, we switched from fiber optics into an infrared imaging, all with the same people, same building, same basic technology. And, you know, we became profitable, and, you know, last year, you know, we had about 17 million in sales and about 3 million in profit. So those are realistic numbers for our sale price. So, you know, if you look at what was it like last October, just in general for, you know, buying and selling companies, it was a much more sober period, we found. Acquirers were looking for value, you know, not for deals. Obviously, military is very strong, you know, but a lot of people ask us, so why did you sell, you know, if you had such good numbers? The reason is something that often happens. In order for you to approach markets like the military or very often in pharmaceuticals, you need to team up with a strong person. For instance, if the government buys something from a small company, even if it's the best and it's proven and so forth, the government wants to have the confidence that you're going to be around in 3 more years for when they need replacements, repairs, or whatever. And often you can give this confidence to a customer by being associated with a name like Boeing, Raytheon, or, you know, in our case, we were looking at the aerospace military market. So it was a long-term need to, you know, have that sell to the big players that, you know, got us to sell. Now, what's it like now? You know, there's some signs of heating up again in high technology, and especially in my field, which is optoelectronics. For instance, Finisar and Bookham stock went up about 2 or 3 times. Now, I don't know if that was from Kramer or, you know, from the market really increasing the value. It's a bit easier now to get venture capital money, although it's certainly not a feeding frenzy. And, you know, my guess is that sometime within the next year, we're going to see some sort of a blockbuster sale or acquisition that, you know, will look like a big winner. You know, so you know, I've just kind of reviewed the last 5 years, at least my view of it. And so, you know, how do you make some principles out of this? So I usually make tables of things. And, you know, all these different time periods, 1984 is when I started my first business, you know, all the way down to the present. And I asked myself, well, how easy was it to get capital or to hire people or to rent facilities? You know, how easy was this? And you see, each year it changes. And when I started my first business, it was very difficult to raise capital. But it was easy to hire people because, you know, there was unemployment was high and companies had been closing down, so it wasn't difficult at all to hire people. And also there was a lot of empty space, so you could cut deals with landlords. You know, if I remember, we got something like a year's free rent for signing a 5-year lease. Now, fast forward to 1990, and that was a boom time, and it was easy to get money, but all the good people were hired, so it was tough, you know, getting people, and rents were at an all-time high at that period. And so on, you go down the table, but the thing I find that's consistently the same is what I call leverage, and you can trade all these things off. Many times I'll talk to people that want to start a business, and they'll say, you know, I would love to do this, but I just can't get enough money. And you know, money is a resource. It's like people and equipment. You know, these things can all be traded off. When we started Sensors Unlimited in 1992, we didn't have a lot of money, and we're basically a semiconductor business, and we need equipment that costs millions of dollars, and we didn't have the money for that. But we had these research contracts, and we had some partnerships with Princeton University, which had the equipment, but didn't have the research support for it. So, you know, we used our leverage by sharing these research contracts, and also people. When we started our company, we had engineers who were probably underused in the beginning. So we had our engineers help Princeton University run their lab, and in turn, we got to use their laboratory space. So you can trade these things off, and if you're willing to be flexible about, you know, where you locate and what people you hire, and what the money availability is, you can usually, you know, run a business. So that's why I say the leverage in all times, I find, is good. A little bit about my previous company, Sensors Unlimited. As I mentioned, we were an infrared sensing company. We used a material called indium gallium arsenide, which is just basically a photodetector, or really a solar cell that, you know, converts heat into an electrical signal and ultimately a video camera, as we made here. Some of the unique things about sensors, I found that the old-fashioned ways worked best. You know, we had a good working environment, but you know, we don't do flex time, and you know, we focus on the business. We start at 8, we work to 5+. You know, you won't find disheveled dressing, you won't find foul language. I've found, just very selfishly, you know, if you run a business in a professional manner, you get professional results, and it works. So, you know, just out of selfishness, if you know, do it the right way, it works. We had a lot of social events, and one of the things I found, the best way to hire people are your own employees. You know, if you run a good company and you have a good environment, your employees are the recruiters. In fact, I did statistics on this, and I found that was our single biggest source of good employees were our own employees, and, you know, working our way down to newspaper ads, headhunters, and so on. So, you know, we developed our own culture, and the one thing I'd pass on to anyone starting a new business is you'll find your own culture, and yours will be different than mine, that will be different from someone else's, but you will evolve a culture, and, you know, all successful businesses have it. Another thing that helped us at Sensors Unlimited was forming a lot of partnerships. It's difficult to work in a vacuum. You know, we're about 3 miles away from Princeton University, and I had a good relationship with Steve Forrest, who was a professor of electrical engineering. I had worked with him before he came to Princeton, and he came to Princeton at about the same time I started Sensors Unlimited, so it was a nice, you know, synergy, and we both helped each other out. We did some work with Sarnoff Corporation, Rutgers, NJIT, all the New Jersey universities. And something I can really recommend if you have a business in this state or in the New Jersey area, hook up with the New Jersey Technology Council. It's one of the best networking organizations I've ever belonged to, and you know, I've gotten a lot of benefit out of working with them, and I highly recommend you looking into it if you're starting a business. So anyway, been very fortunate in starting the two companies. I mentioned the Epitax story as well as Sensors Unlimited. And one of the satisfying things is even though we drew millions of dollars from the government in terms of research programs, you know, we did produce some good technology. And when we sold our companies, we were able to pay back both the state and the federal government in the form of tax dollars. So the system really works if you play it correctly. You know, if you use government money and you use it well, you know, their payback comes at tax time. So. One of the things people often ask me, well, you know, you were successful selling your company. Can you come in and do mine? Can you sell my company for a lot of money? And I usually, the honest answer is no, I can't. I can't force the market. It's all about timing. And I tell people that selling a business is just like selling a house. It's, you know, there are good times and there are bad times, and you just kind of have to wait for the market. And the best thing to do for selling a business is be ready to have a management team and have a good team presentation. And when you do sell it, don't hold out for the best price, and don't worry that, you know, you can get more money. If you can get a good price, take it and run. So what I learned from, you know, starting and selling two business, I'll go to my grave believing lean and mean is better. And the other thing is I always try now to hire people that are better than me. And I find that's a mistake that's often made in businesses. You know, it's actually, I'm fundamentally maybe a lazy guy, so if I find people that are smarter than me, who are better than me, it makes life easier for me, so why not do it? But I find, you know, often people like to micromanage and they want to have that dominance, and you pay a huge price for that. As a manager, I view my role as to go around, how can I help people? You know, if I have to tell people what to do, I'm in trouble. So, you know, if I like to bring on good people and kind of let them take over. Another thing I've learned is about mistakes. You know, people sometimes say, well, I bet in your second business you made a lot fewer mistakes than you did the first time. And the truth is I probably made more mistakes, but the difference is that I dealt with them quicker. And one example I often bring up is, you know, we've all had this situation. If you have an employee that's just not working out for a variety of reasons, you know, when you first start a business, your tendency is, well, you fix it. You know, you work with that person. You know, you're going to fix this situation and make it work. And the reality is, you know, you often give it more time, and almost always you find out in the end you have the same situation you had in the beginning. And what I do in that situation, I try and deal with it as soon as possible. And I maintain now, if we hire somebody, you can tell within 2 weeks if it's going to work out or not, and probably even sooner. You know almost right away. And you learn that by making the same mistake over and over. But if you can deal with mistakes sooner rather than later, you can make more of them and get away with it. So, all right, again, what I concluded from all this, cash is king, sell high, buy low. That's so obvious. You know, why do you even have that up on a view graph? And yet, it just amazes me how many people in businesses do just the reverse. You know, when the feeding frenzy is on and valuations are high, that's when they buy. And I'll always say profits trump growth. And my motto has been fewer people, work harder, and make it better. So it's not really about technology and markets, although that's really important. Fundamentally, it's about the people. If you have the right people in a business, you know, your chances of success are very high. So, you know, again, persistence, survive mistakes, and focus on the people. And that's the end of the business side. So let me shift gears and get into space. One more time, you know, from the 20 years of hard work with starting companies, I was very fortunate, you know, to be successful with it with a lot of help, starting here at FDU. And because of that, in June of 2003, I was sitting in Starbucks, Princeton, reading the New York Times, and I read this story about space adventurers who had gotten the first 2 private citizens into space. So, I read it and I said, boy, this sounds like something I could do, because, again, I had, sold 2 companies. My daughters are grown up. I'm single. I didn't have a lot of responsibility. So probably it's a good time in my life to do something like that. So I decided to take a crack at it. And, I started in June of 2003. And, 10 months later, I found myself in Russia training for a launch. So I spent 2 months in Star City, which is outside of Moscow, preparing to launch in October of 2004. And then 2.5 months later, I had a routine medical exam, and on a lung x-ray, a small black spot showed up, and they said, "Niet, you're out." And, the reason I mention that is it was a devastating experience, and I bet everybody in this room has had something like that happen to them, where it's just, like that, wow, you get hit over the head and it's something, it's like losing your job or, failing out of flunking a class. And it really bummed me out. And I probably wasn't the most fun guy to be around for the last half of 2004. But the thing is that I credit myself with, it's the same thing I did in grade school. I didn't quit. I didn't give up. And it took me 9 months to convince, first of all, the spot went away and it was harmless, but it took me 9 months to convince the Russian medical doctors that I was healthy enough to go back into training. Finally wore them down, and it was almost exactly a year ago to the date that they finally said, okay, we'll let you back in training. And so last May I went and was able to get launched in October. But it was a long, hard journey, and there were a lot of parallels in getting into space as there was to starting a business. Believe me, it wasn't just writing a check and going up into space. Just like starting a business isn't, getting that venture capital check and running. There's a lot of hard work and disappointments in between. So here's a picture. This is what 20 million horsepower looks like. All right, this is the Soyuz rocket. I was very impressed with the Russian space technology for a number of reasons. It's very good. They have a lot of regard for human life, and they make great use of resources. And again, here's a business analogy, right? The Russians don't have $16 billion a year the way NASA does. Their budget is $600 million to do space every year. So they've got to conserve resources. All right. That rocket was pulled out by an ordinary freight locomotive. It was pulled out to the launch pad. And after it was pulled out, that locomotive went and hauled freight. And I saw this over and over again in the Russian space program. They had multiple use of tools and equipment, to save money, but it made a lot of sense. That thing was mounted on a huge freight car, but it was pulled on an ordinary railroad locomotive. The white section there is a shroud that surrounds the Soyuz vehicle that we actually traveled in, and everything in gray is just rocket. It's a mixture of jet fuel and liquid oxygen. So here's a picture of our crew inside the Soyuz. You can see how cramped it is. It's a lot like the Apollo capsule. I'm on the left. Cosmonaut Valeri Tokarev is in the center, and the astronaut Bill McArthur is on the right. We were in that position for 2.5 hours before launch and about 4.5 hours after launch. And we all wore Huggy diapers, if you know what they are, and we all used them. So, yeah. Here's the actual launch, October 1st. People ask me how I felt, and I felt great taking off. The usual question is, was I scared? And I said, yeah, I was scared. I was scared of anybody with a white coat and a stethoscope because, they stood between me and what I wanted to do. And that's true, you'll find if you ask any astronaut or cosmonaut, the doctor is the enemy. The launch actually was very smooth. A couple of words about the space station. It's only about 220 miles above the Earth. It's actually very close to Earth. And it's been up for about 6 years, and it orbits every 90 minutes. It's traveling over 17,000 miles an hour. So even though it only took us 10 minutes to get into orbit, which gave us the weightless condition, it took us an extra 2 days to reach the station because we had to do over 30 orbits before we could dock to the station. Here's a picture of me about 4 hours after we launched, and all the systems had checked out, so I was able to open my visor and take the space gloves off. You see I have a video camera there because all the video equipment on the station is European. It's either PAL or CCAM, and I didn't want to go through all the conversion, so I took an NTSC version of the camera up and left it there. Here's the actual docking. That's the Soyuz vehicle approaching. Remember, we're both going 17,500 miles an hour. That's 5 miles every second, over the Earth. So, and that docking was totally automated. It was controlled by the ground, linking up by radio signals, information to the computer, which controlled the guidance system. And it was really flawless. The only hitch we had was we tried to open the hatch, it wouldn't open. And it took us 5 minutes of yanking on the hatch to actually get it open. Here's a picture of me after I got into the station. You can see there's a lot more room inside the station than on the Soyuz. The station is, the habitable part of the station is about 170 feet long, and I think a good, and it maybe, it's a bit longer than this room. But if you imagine 4 tractor trailers stuck together, that's probably a good analogy of what it's like. But there's lots of room to roam, and when people ask me what was my favorite thing in space, that was it, just floating. It was like magic, even though, I know all the physics of why you're floating and so forth. It still feels like magic when you do it. Here's a view of the station looking outside. This is my first view of Earth. And looking down, it's the same blue sky that you see up. Now notice space is black, all right? There's no air to scatter light. That's why the sky looks blue. So unless you're looking directly at the sun, space is going to look black. That's our Soyuz vehicle docked to the station. And those are on the upper right solar cell panels that convert sunlight into electricity to power the station. And that long, skinny white thing is the Canada arm that lifts cargo from the shuttle to the station. I didn't mention in the beginning that there are 2 ways of getting up to the station. One is the NASA shuttle, and the other is the Russian Soyuz. Now, the shuttle hasn't been running for most of 3 years, and also they don't take private citizens. The only way a private person like me can go up is to launch on the Russian Space Agency, Soyuz, which both launches and lands in Kazakhstan in Central Asia. Here's, one of my favorite things. I took a Fairleigh flag up with me, and you wouldn't believe the bureaucracy I had to go through to bring that flag. Fibers of that flag were taken to test labs and burned, analyzed, and that's a certified flag. So anyway, I had a lot of fun, bringing it up. And again, I remember today I was with some of my old profs, Prof. Jaffe and Prof. Howtow, and I can remember our first courses in physics where we learned about mass, momentum, and inertia. And here I got to be the experiment. And I learned firsthand what inertia was as I bumped my head against the wall from, remaining in motion. So here's how you drink water in space. I'm holding a water faucet in my hand and opening it up slightly. You see, fluids have their own way of behaving in a weightless environment. Yeah. People often ask me, well, how do you shower in space? And as you can see from there, the answer is you don't, because that's what would happen with fluids. The way we kept clean was with wet wipes. Every morning we'd wash ourselves off. That wasn't too bad for me because I was only up there for 10 days, but imagine the people that stay up there for 6 months, which is the normal crew assignment. The first thing they want to do when they come down is take a hot shower. Here's how you eat in space. We didn't have the toothpaste tubes and astronaut ice cream. We had either canned or dehydrated foods. Now this is a mixture of rice, meat, and vegetables. And this is cosmonaut Sergei Krikalev. He holds the record, 803 days in space. It's, the whole way of thinking has to change in a weightless environment because, you can't lay things down. You can't have a desk because if you put something down, it's just going to float away. So that spoon, when he's done with it, has to go underneath a bungee cord that's on our dining table. I had email service on the station, and here's a video of me sending an email to my daughter. And normally we have foot straps that hold us to the floor, and you see when you don't have the foot straps, that's what happens. And you see just the pressure of typing on the keyboard is enough to lift me towards the top. And that's the fun stuff you can do in a weightless environment. The thing to remember is we're actually all falling to Earth just like you jumped out of a window. All right, but having the rocket velocity of 17,000 miles per hour, is what keeps you in orbit. You're always falling into Earth, but at the same time, you're going outward. Here's how you go the other way. It's, again, this inertia thing. It's easier. Once you put yourself in motion, you stay in motion, and the hard part is to stop. You have to do by grabbing onto a rail and giving up your momentum to the station again. You also notice shorts and short sleeves. It was very comfortable on the station. It was like 72 degrees Fahrenheit, sea level air pressure. Those are the conditions we maintained. And we kept the humidity about 40 to 50%. Everyone wants to know, how do you go to the bathroom in space? I get asked this in schools all the time, so I stay ahead of them and show them. These are the toilets. There's a full one coming out and an empty going in. And this is astronaut John Phillips in the flowery shirt. He's been on the station for almost 6 months now. So he's showing Bill McArthur, who just came up, he's showing him the ropes of how to do this. So if you wonder how glorious it is to be an astronaut, this is one of the many jobs you have to do. Of course, there are special tools for this. And the other thing is, you can't leave nuts and bolts lying around. And there's John reaching in to get a couple of bolts to, hold the toilet down. There, you see that hose in the middle with the yellow funnel on top? That's what men use to urinate in. It's literally a vacuum cleaner hose where you turn a motor on and, the suction pulls the liquid in. And the toilet, I'm not going to get too graphic about that, but gravity isn't helping you, so it takes some getting used to. And part of the amusement of the astronauts is to see a rookie like me go in and try and use that. Another question I often get, what is it like to sleep in space? I found it very relaxing. My first 2 nights were a little hard because of the excitement, but by the 3rd night, I I fell asleep, and it was very relaxing. This is a normal sleeping position because, again, your arms don't have weight, so it's just as easy to have your arms here as it is down here. Similarly, you don't need a pillow because your head has no weight. What you do need is to tie the sleeping bag up, and that's a primary reason you have a sleeping bag. If you don't, I mean, you'll just float around and whack your head on the side. So you can see by my left elbow there are a couple of strings sticking out, and you tie yourself onto a wall. It doesn't matter whether you sleep vertically, horizontally, or upside down. I mean, it all feels the same. My company, Sensors Unlimited, makes these infrared cameras. Interesting story, I was not able to get an export license, so these are not working models, all right? Because these are sold to the military, you know, they have defense applications, we had to take them through Russia and Kazakhstan to get them to the space station. Believe it or not, we could not get an export license, and I know many of you that deal with aerospace military products will know what that situation's like. So that's just showing that there's no camera chip inside. Here's a view of the chips that go inside. These were some souvenirs I took back from my employees. There are about 20 chips attached to that black box, and you see what happens if you let go of something. I had a digital camera on the station, and I lost it. What happened was, you know, I was taking pictures, had a little pocket camera, stuck it back in my pocket and forgot to close the zipper, and the camera just slipped out, and just like that, and I lost it. And you can lose things on the station. I looked for hours and hours, could not find it, and you know, even came back down days later without my camera. 3 weeks later, Bill McArthur found it and actually downlinked the images to Johnson Space Center. So even though I lost my camera, I got the images, and I think the Fairleigh flag was one of them. For any of the physics people in the audience, this is a trick you learn in elementary physics. If you spin a book about 3 different perpendicular axes, you see 2 of them it spins easy, but watch this 3rd axis. Right, the book does not like to spin that way, all right, it wobbles. That has to do with a thing called moment of inertia. All right, that's an easy axis. That has low moment of inertia. All right, that has the highest moment of inertia, so the book wants to go back and spin about the other 2 axes. This is important for communication satellites. When they're released from the shuttle, they have to be spinning in order to be in stable orbit. Many of you have also experienced this if you've ever pulled a suitcase through an airport on wheels, and you hit a bump, and you know how it starts to rotate? It's spinning about the easy axis. You would like it to go around the hard axis, but it's not going to do that. These next few view graphs were not taken by me, but they're kind of descriptive. These are NASA photos that show how the Soyuz undocks from the station and how we come back down to Earth. The Soyuz is going in this direction, so when we burn the main engine, it's going to lose velocity and it's going to fall to Earth. If you see that spherical section with the probe sticking out, that's the habitat module that was docked to the station. And that is now loaded with all the garbage. Those toilet pots, food waste, and other such things are in that section. And just before we enter the atmosphere, we jettison the engine and all that garbage. We're in that middle capsule called a descent module, which again looks very much like the Apollo capsule. But that has a heat shield underneath it, a special shield designed to resist heat. Because when you enter air at 17,000 miles an hour, I mean, that's what happens. There's so much friction with the air that the air becomes completely ionized. All the electrons get stripped off, forms a plasma, and it's thousands of degrees Celsius outside. If you didn't have a heat shield, the descent module would burn up, and that's what happens to the other 2 units. So the garbage gets burned up before it ever gets down to Earth. But this is a way of converting velocity into heat. All right, so we slow down from our 17,000+ miles an hour down to just a couple of hundred miles an hour, and when that happens, we open the parachute. which further slows down our descent. When we get about 3 feet off the ground, we fire retro rockets, which further slows down our descent. And you can kind of see how flat and open Kazakhstan is, and that's why the Russians both launch and land the Soyuz vehicles there. Here's a picture of me right after I landed. You see them opening my visor so I can breathe Earth's air instead of spacesuit air. Here's a picture of John Phillips on the left, Sergei Krikalev in the middle, and me on the right. You notice the Russian doctors hovering over us, because when you go up, both go up into a weightless environment, and when you come back down into gravity, your vestibular system is disturbed, your inner ear, a sense of balance. And you know just how if you spin around a few times, you feel a little bit dizzy. That's how you feel when you come back down from the space station. It only took me about 2 days to recover because I'd only been 10 days in space, but the other 2 guys have been 6 months and took them about 2 weeks. Even though I was able to walk off, you see I have a person on either arm because it's likely that if I make a sudden movement, I'll get dizzy and fall down. The other unique thing about this photo is I was 1 inch taller. All right, when you're in a weightless environment, your vertebrae, come apart because you don't have gravity pushing down on them. But you lose that after about a day of gravity pushing down on you. So, to close up comments, would I do it again? Absolutely, I loved it. I didn't have any problems, and I would love to do it again. And the thing that impressed me the most was just how small Earth is. It's this little, it looks like this little blue sphere. And also how thin the atmosphere is around the Earth. Believe me, there isn't much of it. I'll be glad to answer questions if we have time.
Yeah, a few questions in the mic.
All right. Or a loud voice.
3 feet from the Earth, the rockets fired?
Yes, the retro rockets.
From the spacecraft itself?
Yes, they're automatic. Believe it or not, they're controlled by radioactive materials. Now think about it. What is more reliable than radioactivity? All right? It's never going to fail. So there's a Geiger counter on the bottom of the Soyuz. And as soon as it senses the radioactivity bouncing off the Earth, it sets off the... Russians have very clever approaches to space. I was very impressed with it. Yes?
How much Russian can you speak?
Neogen Hadasho. Not very well. I had Russian lessons for about 6 months, and I'm not going to claim I'm fluent in it. But again, this is a Russian vehicle, so all the instructions from the ground were in Russian. All the gauge did not say pressure, it said davlenia. So I had to know the technical terms and at least the minimum amount to communicate with the ground. But at 60 years old, it's hard to learn a new language. Constant.
I missed, how was reentry landing take place?
Oh, how did reentry take place? Yeah,
Reentry, then landing.
okay, the reentry takes about 3 hours, and 1.5 of that is just doing an orbit to check out all the systems. For anyone technical, what you do to land is you have the circular orbit. I mean, once you're in a circular orbit, you're there basically indefinitely, just like the moon is, okay? But when you fire that main engine, you turn that circular orbit into an elliptical one, all right? And the small axis of the ellipse just grazes the Earth's atmosphere. And when that happens, within about a half orbit, you burn up all that heat and you're able to release the parachute. And then we come down by parachute on land. The Apollo landed in the ocean, mainly because we don't have, here in the United States, hundreds of miles of open land the way they do in Kazakhstan. And the Russians don't have a big navy the way we do. So, there's reasons for everything. Yes? Did I have to exercise at all? I did a little bit of exercising, not much. For the first 3 or 4 days, they told us not to exercise, again, because of this vestibular stuff. But the cosmonauts and astronauts work out 2.5 hours every day. They do treadmill, bicycle, and spring weights. And you say, how do you do a treadmill in a weightless environment? Well, you have rubber bands that are hooked to the floor, and they hold you down so that, as you're walking on the treadmill, the force times distance is the energy you create. Even at that, you lose some muscle mass in space. Now, it wasn't much for me because I was only there for 10 days, but the 6-monthers, the guys up there for 6 months do come back weaker than they left, and also they lose calcium from the bones. That's another aspect of space. So they need about 2 months to recover, all the way in the back.
Did you have any responsibilities in regard to as
Did I have any responsibilities? Yeah, don't screw up. But that, I'm only half kidding when I say that. That certainly was expected of me. I had, in the Soyuz going up and going down, I had control of the oxygen valve. There's if the pressure drops in the cabin, as it did on our descent, we had a leak coming down. And we lost about 15% of the air pressure. And so my job was to, under the command of Krikalev, I got to open the oxygen valve and hold it until the pressure came back up to normal. And I had to do that several times. One of the risks in doing that is I'm admitting pure oxygen into the cabin, and the air we breathe is about 21% oxygen. And when you get above 40% oxygen, the air becomes flammable, so that if you have a spark, it can easily, set your tablecloth on fire. In fact, that's the accident that happened in 1967 with Gus Grissom. I think it was Apollo 1, where they all died in a fire, and so they had 100% oxygen. So if we got over 40% oxygen, the cabin would automatically depress. A hole would open up in the cabin. Now, that's why you wear the spacesuit, is so then the air is only contained in the spacesuit and not in the environment, so you minimize the fire risk. But other than that, I did 3 medical experiments. One was I took 50 bacteria samples that I brought back to Earth. I did some work with lower back pain and also motion sickness. About half the people that go into space get motion sickness, and they can't predict who will and who won't. Fortunately, I didn't. So while I was up, they had me do some head motions to try and make me sick. And the instructions were, as soon as you feel ill, stop, and we'll mark down how many reps. And fortunately, I'm one of the people that don't get motion sickness. Yes?
Greg, I know you go around talking to school children. So far, how many have you been able to deliver this wonderful presentation, and how far are you going to keep going with that?
Okay, since New Year's, I've done about 120. Basically, this talk to 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And my goal in this, I think is shared by a lot of people here, is to get more American kids into science and engineering. And I don't care how. If they go, I'm happy. So, I use this as a lure.
Okay, we're going to end it there. He's going to stay around, so feel free to come up and ask your questions.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Good.
Yeah.
Great. Stay right there.
Yeah. All right.
Greg, thank you very much. That was a brilliant talk and an inspiring one as well. We wish you much success, and we hope we have a few astronauts out there. Thank you and have a good night.